Welcome to the Joy of Cruising podcast with your host, award-winning author Paul C. Thornton, a weekly conversation with the amazing cruisers featured in the Joy of Cruising trilogy, comprised of The Joy of Cruising, Cruising Interrupted, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again. Each book is a compilation of features about cruisers and cruise and travel personalities from around the world. It's the next best thing to cruising, hearing about cruising from the unique and diverse perspectives of Paul's amazing guests.
Hello, passionate cruisers. This is Paul, and this week on the Joy of Cruising podcast, I am delighted to welcome Sam and Brian of DCL Duo podcast. Their impressive website describes them as follows. The DCL Duo podcast is a Disney Cruise Line focused podcast with occasional detours in the general cruising and Disney topics. We're fans of the Disney Parks, Adventures by Disney, Run Disney, and Disney Vacation Club. I'm thankful for DCL Duo's occasional detours in the general cruising because they had me on their podcast a couple of years ago, and my only experience with Disney Cruise Line was a single cruise on Disney Dream. I took my grandkids on their first cruise, and there was never any consideration for another cruise line for my grandkids' first cruise. I like to say to the cruise personalities I write about in the books that we are forever connected. Many years from now, their friends and relatives will be able to read about them in a book written by me. And that is true for Sam and Brian, as DCL Duo is featured in my new release, The Joy of Cruising Again, in a section called The Communicators. But my connection with DCL Duo is extra special, and it relates back to that aforementioned appearance I made on their podcast in 2020. I had written more than half of my second cruise book, which at the time was called More Joy of Cruising, when the world changed due to the pandemic. People were dying, cruising shut down, and there wasn't much joy anywhere. I stopped writing completely and did a lot of moping around as my passions of cruising and writing about cruising were taken from me. And then I received a message from someone I didn't know. It said, "Big fan of The Joy of Cruising, and I heard you recently on a podcast. My wife and I recently started a podcast of our own, the DCL Duo, was wondering if you might be willing to come to our show to talk about your book. We found it super interesting as avid cruisers. Hope you'll consider it and would love to have you on." Of course, I jumped at the chance to talk about cruising, and Sam and Brian's glass half full outlook was infectious. After the podcast, even though a restart of cruising was nowhere on the horizon, I restarted writing. More Joy of Cruising became Cruising Interrupted and was released 6 months later, when cruising was still shut down. For that lifting of my spirits and shot of confidence and motivation when I needed it most, I am forever grateful to DCL Duo. DCL Duo podcast is now over 300 episodes. Their milestone 300th episode was just a few weeks ago, and I was honored to be the guest on that show. Welcome, DCL Duo, to the Joy of Cruising podcast.
Thank you so much for having us, Paul. We're so happy to be here. It's our first time on your show, and we could not be more thrilled to be chatting with you today. Obviously, you have been a big part of our podcasting journey, so we are so happy to be a part of your podcasting journey.
Well, thank you. First time, but assuredly I can say it won't be the last time.
All right. I like it.
Sam and Brian, how are you both doing?
We're doing good. So today is a Friday. We just got back actually to town on Monday. We were in Orlando, or we flew back from Orlando, but we just disembarked the Wish on Monday. So 4 days ago, we were getting off of a Disney cruise. So it seems very appropriate that we should be, here talking with you only a few days later. But yeah, we're doing great. If not a little bit jet lagged. But busy getting back into the swing of home stuff after being on essentially spring break. It was Nathan's spring break.
How you, Brian?
I'm good, Paul. Sam said we just got back Monday, so I've been digging out of work all week and also trying to keep up with the the podcast. So doing good. I can't complain, though. I can't complain.
And how's Nathan?
He's excellent. He's at school right now, but he is doing really great. He's happy to be back at school after the week off, back to seeing his friends, although he had a fantastic time on the cruise. And I have to say, it's been pretty amazing to watch because our last few cruises, we've given Nathan a lot more independence, meaning he's been able to check himself in and out of the kids club on the Disney ships. And it's been really fun to see him exercising independence, but following along with the rules and communicating with us about where he's going and where he's been, and just keeping us in the loop. It's pretty amazing to watch. He's 9.5 at this point. So it's really nice to be able to give him some more freedom on the ships than we can give him at home.
Now, for the listeners, Nathan is the co-star of the DCL Duo podcast, actually a highly demanded by the audience co-star. And I mentioned him a few times in the new book, The Joy of Cruising Again, and you can see his picture in the book. Now, how many times have you guys been on the Wish?
So this was sailing number 3 and 4. Sailing number 1 was the maiden voyage. Sailing number 2 was the Disney Vacation Club member charter immediately following the maiden voyage. So we did a back-to-back when she first sailed. Mm-hmm. And then because the Wish only does 3 and 4 day or 3 and 4 night cruises, we did a back-to-back. So that's why it's number 3 and number 4.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So before we talk about DCL Duo, tell our listeners about yourselves, where you're from, what's your background with Disney, how and when did you get involved with podcasting, anything you would like to share.
Well, I will start. I am originally from Louisville, Kentucky. That's where I grew up. And at about the time I started high school, my family moved to Southern California with my dad's job. And so I spent my high school years in Southern California and then ended up in college in Oregon and law school in DC and now back in Seattle with Sam. And so that's kind of my background on where I'm from. My involvement with Disney, I'd say when I was a kid, my parents took me a couple times to Disney World. I think 3 trips maybe. They loved to go at the holidays, but this was back before there was Animal Kingdom, and Hollywood Studios was probably called the MGM Experience or something like that at that point. So we would just go to Magic Kingdom and Epcot and spent a few Christmases or around Christmas times there. And then in high school, it was not uncommon for us, since we were in Southern California, my high school friends, we would go up to Disneyland for the day. Again, that was pre-California Adventure even opening, so it's just one park. But we would go up and spend a day up there and use our ridiculously low California resident rates. And then, after high school, I don't think I had much interaction with Disney until my 40th birthday, which is when we took our first Disney cruise. And it's sort of in the history books from there, I guess. We've done 20 Disney cruises now together, or I guess Sam is one behind me and Nathan's a few behind her because we've done some adult only cruising. But 20 Disney cruises later, we're Disney Vacation Club members, annual pass holders, you name it with Disney outside of Club 33, and we probably have it. So yeah, we kind of went all in on Disney following our first cruise in 2018.
Yeah. And I'm originally from Long Island, New York, having access to Florida, of course, by a 2-hour flight. We did go down to Disney World a couple of times when I was a kid, but not a whole lot because it was obviously quite expensive and we did not have the funds to go to be regular Disney park goers. I did go to Disneyland once as a kid because I had grandparents that were in San Diego. And so on one trip we were able to go. But honestly, for me, my love of Disney had to do with the Disney movies. The golden age of Disney is the 1990s. Come on. I mean, late 80s into the 1990s with Little Mermaid and Lion King and Aladdin. those were the movies that I grew up going to. I would go to my local movie theater, usually when the movie opened, opening day. I was very big fan. I definitely, I mean, I chose for my Sweet 16 to go to Walt Disney World instead of having a Sweet 16 party. So I've always loved Disney. One of my very best friends from childhood was also a very big Disney fan and would go yearly with his family down to Disney. And he ended up having his career be Disney focused. I did not, but yeah, I've always just been a Disney fan. I had tried actually when we were early in our marriage to get Brian to go to the Disney parks, and he was not really interested. But I think we would have probably stumbled across Disney Cruise Line earlier if not for the fact that he decided he wanted to do a cruise for his 40th birthday. And this is talked about in your book. But we ended up going on Disney, and that was where Brian, I think, fell in love with Disney Cruise Line and fell in love with Disney again. For me, I don't think I ever lost that love of Disney. So yeah, it's, as Brian said, we're all in on Disney in every way, shape, and form, including Aulani. So we're big on all things Disney, with the cruise being, I would say, our first love, though.
So Brian, talk about that 40th birthday. That got you back into Disney in a big way. So tell us how that happened.
Yeah, so for my 40th birthday, I sort of told Sam, like, I think for our 40ths, we should do like a fun trip or a vacation. And we had been cruising actually together before, years and years prior, with my family on Celebrity Cruise Lines on some of their what are now very old ships. And our experience with cruising had really been, what was Emma's original site called? Cruising is just for old people, or cruising isn't just for old people.
Or cruising isn't just
But that was
for
the
old
impression I
people.
had, because based on the sort of demographics of the ships we were on, we were always kind of the youngest crowd around. The scene on board wasn't for us, but I decided, I want to give cruising one more try. I did like those vacations, being out on the ocean and going to sort of warmer climates. So we reached out to Sam's friend, actually, who, she's known forever. And he was working at the time for a different cruise line than Disney. And I asked him, who should we sail with? And he said, Disney, hands down. And I was like, but you work for a different cruise line. And he said, yes, but I choose to vacation with Disney. And so we signed up, gave it a shot. It was just Sam and I, and him and his partner and two other of our friends here from the Seattle area. And we did a fabulous 7-night cruise on the Disney Fantasy. And from the moment we stepped on board the ship, I was completely taken with the level of service that we were getting from Disney. It's something I had not experienced on the other cruise lines that we had sailed, or the other cruise line we had sailed. And loved it, just fell in love with it. He gave us a tour of the ship because he'd been on it many times, and I was blown away by the spaces. And then throughout the sailing, I was like, this is the same demographic as Sam and I. It's, young families, younger people, lots of fun geared toward our demographic, and just loved it. And so didn't look back from there. I think we booked our next 7-night cruise on board. And we ended up doing the same sailing on the Fantasy again. And I think we did it a third time. And then we started branching out to some of the other ships, and just really haven't looked back.
Well, I recall when I interviewed you for The Joy of Cruising Again, your friend who introduced you to Disney had a quote. I love the quote, and I've actually used the quote in other settings. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, his quote was, Disney Cruise Line is an entertainment company that happens to have ships. The others are cruise lines that are happening to do entertainment. And he thought that the entertainment forward approach that Disney had really set them apart from some of the other cruise lines. And I have to say, it's true. The most evident piece of that is the shows that they do on board are not the typical kinds of variety shows you get on some of the other cruise lines and that we experienced on Celebrity. They are storytelling, because Disney has a catalog of really great stories that they can then tell and produce on the stage on these ships. And so it really is storytelling. It's just like when you experience cast members in the park and you ask them about something about park operations, they always have a really fun, magical approach to answering those questions. It doesn't give away the quote unquote magic. And it's the same thing on Disney Cruise Line. So it's that entertainment forward approach is really evident on the cruise line.
Yeah, I just thought that was a great quote. So talk about DCL Duo podcast.
Well, Sam usually has me do that. So because it was my harebrained idea. So we were actually on a podcast for someone else who was featured in your book, Steve Creasy at the DCL podcast, was a guest on his show a few times, and listened to a lot of the DCL related podcasts that were out there at the time, as we thought about planning our own cruises and kind of keeping up with the happenings around the cruise line. And right before the pandemic, I came downstairs. I remember Sam was sitting in our family room. I said, what if we did a podcast? Like, I feel like we have something we could offer here. I think we have a different voice and a different take. And we had a trip planned down to Disneyland that was going to be just the two of us. And we had all of this amazing stuff lined up. We were doing a VIP tour. We were eating at the chef's table at this restaurant at Disneyland called Napa Rose, which is amazing. But had all these great experiences. I said, what if we started something and we, used that trip as the launching pad for it? And she, I think, kind of rolled her eyes, and we brainstormed names, and then I was checking social media to see what was available, and we landed on DCL Duo pretty quickly. It was available. I grabbed it, and we just decided to go for it. And in early days, it was us on our cell phone using an app called Anchor to record the podcast. I sometimes go back and listen to those with such dread. I can't believe they're still in our catalog. Thankfully, now that we're at 300 episodes, they're starting to roll off Apple Podcasts because they'll only let us maintain 300 episodes on the platform. So we started there, and then Sam will tell you, maybe I won't steal her thunder, but Sam will tell you, like, when I go all in on something, I go all in. And so now we've got all the equipment, all the things, all the tech behind the podcast. It has grown into quite the endeavor week to week as we have done the podcast. But it was an amazing journey that started in our living room, coming up with a name and a harebrained idea. And Sam herself would tell you, I don't think she thought we would be here 3 years later. So.
Yeah, I definitely did not think we would be here 3 years later. I agree with everything that Brian said, including the fact that I thought it was a totally harebrained idea. And I honestly thought that it would just last maybe a couple of months. But it has turned into a huge community. We've got a ton of listeners. Just to say, what is the DCL Duo? The DCL Duo are Brian and I, right? We are a couple. We are a duo who loves cruising on Disney Cruise Line. We talk about all things Disney Cruise Line. We also like to do compare contrast episodes about other cruise line and other cruising type experiences like expedition cruising, small ship cruising, river cruising, those kinds of topics that we think are in a lot of ways similar to large ship cruising, but in a lot of ways very different to, large ship cruising. But we like to even do comparisons within the large ship cruising community. So we'll have, people come on and talk about sailing on, for example, Celebrity or Holland America or Norwegian, and, who've had experience on Disney to tell us what are the differences between these cruise lines. What can we expect if we as avid Disney cruisers decide we want to branch out and we want to see what else is out there, what can we expect if we're going to go sail on Norwegian? And what can we expect if we're going to sail in the Haven on Norwegian versus concierge on Disney Cruise Line? We like to cover lots of different experiences, including luxury experiences within those large ship cruising, because we think there's a lot of interest in that space and not a lot of information. Not a lot of podcasts are covering that space. Another luxury space we really enjoy covering is Adventures by Disney, which is some of their adventures are river cruising on AMA Waterways. So it's a collaboration between Disney and AMA Waterways. And some of their experiences are land-based excursions. And what those are small group tours that are focused on families. So they might be to Italy or to Paris and London, or a few days in Rome, or there are some even in Egypt and in China. I mean, there are even some in the United States. So they are planned luxury tour experiences where Disney has planned out everything for you. You have a guide with you or multiple guides with you the entire trip. and you just need to book your flight, and that's it. Everything else will be taken care of. So we like those experiences as well, because we do think that people who cruise often like to do other traveling, and often people who cruise like the kind of travel where you don't have to do quite a lot of thinking, where it's kind of all mapped out for you. That's one of the reasons why I love cruising, frankly, is I don't have to do a lot of thinking. The itinerary is kind of mapped out. I just need to choose what excursions I want to do.
Yeah, I should say it took us a while to find our podcasting voice. But I think the voice we have landed on. So our tagline for our show is Disney Cruising Elevated, because as Sam has sort of said, we really like to focus on the experiences that not everyone may be able to have, including ourselves. We've had people on the show who have talked about staying in this luxurious tower suite on the Disney Wish. We will never pay to stay in the tower suite, or it will take winning the lottery before I would be willing to pay that kind of money. But I think that there's a lot of curiosity and voyeurism out there around some of these lesser known or more exclusive experiences. And we kind of want to demystify them a little bit and help people understand what they are, and also expose that there may be some value to them for some cruisers who've been on the fence about experiencing them or not. So it took us a while to find our unique voice in this space, but that's kind of become our unique voice. And we think that our unique advantage in this space is also that we're not travel agents ourselves. It's something we talk a lot about on our show. We have a travel agent sponsor, but our podcast success, or our business success, or our livelihood is not really tied to the podcast directly. It's something that we would do even if we didn't have sponsorship. And so we're not afraid to call Disney out on things that we find to just be horrible experiences on board, or things that we think they should be doing better. Disney IT is some of the worst that I've seen, and we talk about all the time on our show how bad it really is, and how much that's a bad differentiator for them. Or more recently, Disney is one of the, actually I think it's the only cruise line, at least in the US, that is doing in-person muster drills again after having done virtual muster drills. And cruise lines who reverted to in-person have gone back to virtual because it's such a bad guest experience. And every time I experience one, I call them out on it, because I think it's a terrible, terrible guest experience to have people standing on deck in the sun for 45 minutes for a 5-minute announcement. So we say that stuff. We say that stuff. We're blunt about it.
Yeah. The other thing we are fairly, critical, of course, with Disney, understanding that we still love sailing Disney, is the price point, right? We know Disney's price point is not accessible for all cruisers. And that's one of the reasons we do like to do those compare contrast shows. We also have, several episodes we've done on, what are the ways in which you can save a little bit of money on a Disney cruise? Like, what are the tips and tricks for, doing a Disney cruise on somewhat of a budget, understanding that your budget still has to be greater than, let's say, if you're sailing on Carnival. So I think there's a lot of, we like to sort of show all ends of the spectrum, the luxury end of the spectrum, but we also understand that not everybody's going to be able to do those experiences. And so we cover ways in which, how can you go on a Disney cruise and not pay a single dime once you step on board?
I want to go back to Sam said that when Brian, does something, he goes all out. And then Brian kind of alluded to the investment that he has put into the podcast. And I can attest to that, because I was on your show a few weeks ago, and, you actually made this Brooklyn monotone sound pretty good. And I know that had to be with the help of equipment and cutting out the ums and ahs and all that. So I appreciate that. So your podcast, DCL Duo, came out during the cruising lockdown. How else did you guys spend your time during the lockdown? Did you do anything new and different? Grow a pandemic garden, run a marathon, take up bicycling?
Well, we
grew a pandemic gym. We built a pandemic gym in our garage. So I'm actually recording right now from inside our garage. We have a huge,
not Sam's normal recording space, by the way, for those of you out there thinking I've relegated her to the garage.
Yeah, no, not my normal recording space, but we've got this, big rogue rack where you can do like lifting from. We've got an entire rack of free weights. We've got a Peloton bike and a treadmill. So yeah, we invested in a home gym because that was the only way to be able to, work out with, it's quite rainy here in Seattle. I don't know if people have heard this before, but so you do need a space indoors to work out for a lot of the year. And so investing in a home gym was definitely one way we did that. We did a lot of cooking too, I would say.
Well, the other thing that we started doing during the pandemic that is also sitting in our garage is we got into building these like huge Lego creator
Yes,
sets. And I have many of them collected that have gone unbuilt, but that was something that we did because we were able to sort of set them up in our living room and work on them as a family and then, kind of have a project going on. But yeah, I mean, honestly, Paul, the biggest investment in something new that we did during the pandemic was a podcast. And it was a way for us to have a social outlet. Sam is a very social person, and I think she appreciated having the outlet to be able to talk to people regularly about something she's passionate about. And I enjoyed having the hobby of learning just something that was really brand new to me, and having that time to invest in both like finding people to be on the show like you, but also in learning the trade craft in a way that then set us up for, as things went out of lockdown and everyone was traveling again, we had built kind of a fun network of people and guests and a fun community, but also had learned the art of doing it in a way that was all of our spare time during the lockdown, we could use that time to do this. So yeah, it turned out to be a mixed blessing, I would say. I mean, on the one hand, we started a cruising podcast just as cruising stopped. On the other hand, we had lots of time to find people like you and others in the community, Emma, who's been in your book, who had time and wanted to talk about something they were passionate about.
I think it was a really nice way to sort of reminisce about cruising when we couldn't actually travel, we couldn't actually cruise. And we heard from lots of people, you included, of course, Paul, and this is, talked about in your book as well. And also in the dedication in your second book, Cruising Interrupted. But the fact that other avid cruisers could talk to us about a past cruising experience and sort of relive that love and think about cruising optimistically, that it was definitely going to come back at some point, even though we didn't know when. I think that was really helpful for my mental health and probably for a lot of our guests' mental health and hopefully for our listeners' mental health, right? It was really hard to not be able to go anywhere for, 2 years. And the light at the end of the tunnel was at some point we're going to be able to travel again. We're going to be able to cruise again. We just aren't sure exactly when.
Well, it certainly was good for my mental health, as I mentioned in the intro to this podcast and in the dedication to Cruising Interrupted and then clearly, in your feature in The Joy of Cruising Again, it meant a lot to me that you all started your podcast during the cruising lockdown. Now, after the lockdown, you hit the ocean in a big way. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Oh, we hit all 4 ships in a year, right? I think Brian can tell you the order. I can't remember the order at this point, but we were not on the first cruise, but we were on like one of the early cruises on the Disney Dream. But like I said, Brian will know better than I, but we hit all 4 ships within the first year.
Did we hit all 4? I know we did. We started with the Dream. That was the first one that started back up. And then I went on the Fantasy because it started up shortly after the Dream. Right. We didn't hit the Magic, but because it was over in the UK doing the staycations and such, and eventually made its way back. But we did hit the Wonder. So we hit 3 ships in a year. It was easier in some ways. It was both nerve-wracking and easy. So the nerve-wracking part was obviously all of the testing around sailing again, especially on those very early cruises we were on. But once you got over that apprehension around air travel, which a lot of people had, once you sort of got past the testing and were able to board, once you were on the ships, they were a glorious place to be. I actually sort of look back and go, that was just a fabulous time to sail because the ships were at such low capacity. You felt like you had the whole place to yourself. And now for me, that's great because I'm into relaxing when I'm on a cruise and sitting by the pool. For Sam, I'll let her comment.
It was a mixed bag.
Yeah, not as many activities going on board because there just wasn't that many people on board, and they didn't want to have people congregating in one place, obviously. But yeah, once we got over the air travel piece, and we had lots of the weeks leading into a cruise, we'd be on total lockdown as a family, so that no one's being exposed to anything inadvertently. and we didn't want to fail a test
Mhm.
at the port. I mean, Sam can tell you I was neurotic about testing. I still
Brian
am a
was
little
so
bit.
neurotic.
I took a trip
He
to
drives me crazy with
I
that.
took a trip to Disney World one time where I tested every day while I was there just to know if anything was happening. But yeah, so it was a fun time to cruise if you could get past all of the anxiety around it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think there were probably several cruises where Brian drove me crazy prior to the cruise, just with all of the testing anxiety. Um, and we were overly cautious, I would say, as compared to most people. We were doing, even if it wasn't required, we were doing PCR testing before every cruise, even when they were only requiring antigen testing at one point, just for our own peace of mind. But I would say cruising at the early restart was a mixed bag. I agree with Brian. It was lovely to not have as many passengers on the ships. They were, at best at like 50% capacity and at times even lower than that. But it did mean that a lot of the activities were reduced. And one of the things I love on Disney Cruise Line is the entertainment, the shows, all kinds of, character interactions as well. And a lot of that was reduced or unavailable. I mean, there were shows, but instead of having, a show every night, they'd play the same show multiple times because they made you have spacing between different families within the theater. So in order for everyone to see the show, they'd have the same show on 2 nights in a row instead of having a different show. So it's just, those limited experiences. Of course, you couldn't get anywhere near the characters at first. You had to take selfies distanced away from the characters. So they might be like, 15 feet behind you or up on a balcony and you get a selfie of yourself. So it was fun to be back on the ships. We were thrilled to be back on the ships, but it was not quite the same experience as it is back to now.
Although I'd say it was also an emotional experience. I remember the first time we set foot back on a Disney ship, I was welling up with tears. And then we had dinner that evening in one of the restaurants, and they did some, they did some extra special touches to try to make the cruises more magical during that period. And so they started doing cavalcades of characters through the restaurants. And our son was so over the moon joyful about that I was getting ready to break down in tears because I just had not seen him have that level of happiness during the pandemic. And so I think those little extra touches are also something that we now miss. They've gone away because they couldn't scale to the larger, the larger amount of cruisers that they have on board now. And so some of those special touches were really fun in the early days, and we're sad to see some of them go.
Yeah.
Is Disney cruising today, totally back to normal? Are there any holdovers from the COVID era? Anything different, or is it normal?
I think it's the new normal, if that makes sense. So there's no real holdovers left. Like if a buffet on board was self-serve, it's self-serve again. Now on some of the newer ships like the Wish, the buffet on board is crew served, and it will remain crew served by our understanding. But whatever the new normal is, whatever the new normal is the new normal. And so I think there were probably some things that fell off during the pandemic that just won't make their return ever. And those were it was an operational opportunity for Disney to make changes that they probably had wanted to make for years and could now make them under the auspices of, crew and passenger safety. I'll say the only thing that lingers is, obviously if the ships hit a certain threshold, the crew do mask. And so we've seen some of that recur on the Disney Dream. I think recently they hit a threshold where they were having crew members mask again. But otherwise, you really wouldn't notice, I don't think. Sam, do you notice?
Yeah, I agree with Brian. There's maybe a couple of minor things that they never brought back. One that I can think of is they used to have like a character meet and greet if you were in concierge in the concierge lounge, and they haven't brought that back. And I don't know if that's just a permanent, now it's gone. But there's a couple small things like that I just can't think of off the top of my head, but that I think are perhaps gone for good. But generally, it's back to normal. I will say that not just the mandatory masking that they'll do if the ships reach a certain threshold, but you do see people in masks, not a lot of people. But when we were just on the Wish last week, There were, occasionally you'd see cruisers in masks in the theater. I'm somebody who usually, when I go to the theater, I wear a mask. I do that at home as well. I go to our local theater to see, the national tours. And that's just something I feel more comfortable doing in sort of a large crowded space. And same with cast members. So the crew, they call them cast members in Disney, of course. It's optional for them to wear masks for, most of the time. There are a few cast members you will see wearing masks all the time, but I'd say they're the rarer individuals. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My wife wears a mask all the time on the cruise still.
Yeah.
And speaking of crew wearing masks, we were on, in October, we were on Celebrity Beyond, and that sailing was the first sailing that they did not have to wear masks. And they were just so happy. There was a sprinkling of crew members who still wore masks, but by and large, they took the masks off and they were delighted.
Yeah, I think that's the same on Disney. Most of the crew, if they don't have to wear masks, they're typically preferring to not wear masks. But there definitely are individuals who, and we certainly don't judge those individuals. Everyone has to make a personal choice about their health risks. And in particular, if you're someone who's immunocompromised, it might be smart, particularly on a cruise where things can spread pretty quickly, to be wearing a mask. So no judgment from us on that personal decision.
So for our listeners who have not cruised Disney Cruise Line, but are what I would call Disney Cruise curious, what would you tell them that would perhaps push them over the fence?
So if you like Disney magic, Disney whimsy, Disney theming, Disney service, and Disney entertainment, then there is only one cruise line for you, and that is Disney Cruise Line. I'm not saying you won't enjoy cruising on Royal or cruising on Celebrity or Carnival or Holland or Norwegian or MSC or whatever other cruise line is out there in the world, because there's plenty of them. But nobody does entertainment, nobody does theming, nobody does service like Disney. Now, if you want good internet, don't go on Disney.
Yeah.
They've gotten better.
Although they've made upgrades. They're getting better. Yeah, so I think Disney does a really good job of catering to families in a way that enables adults to have time on their own too. They have world-class kids clubs on the ship, and when we were on the Wish recently, which by the way, I think is best in class for families, anyone considering Disney Cruise Line who's going to sail as a family, I would absolutely point them toward the Wish. Our son goes to the kids club. He doesn't want to come out. And so it enables us to do things like having a 3-hour adult dinner at a really, really nice restaurant that would probably be Michelin starred if it were on land. So caters to those adult experiences while providing great experiences for the kids. And, Sam and I have sailed adults only on Disney Cruise Line and have loved it. And I would not say that we are Disney fanatics. I mean, all evidence to the contrary. We are Disney enthusiasts. And so we're not beholden to Disney, but we still like to choose Disney even when we're sailing adults only. We just did a cruise to Norway, just the two of us last September on Disney, and had a fabulous time in the adult spaces on board. And I think a couple of the ships in the Disney fleet, like the Wonder and the Magic, really kind of cater to those kinds of experiences because they have some great adult areas on board. So I think it's a great thing to look at if you are at all like Disney adjacent, Disney interested, which is hard not to be if you're, in our culture, Disney is kind of ubiquitous now. So yeah.
And I mentioned in the introduction that that I took my grandchildren on their first cruise, and there was never any thought that we would do anything but Disney for their first cruise. They were, I think, 4 and 8 at the time. Sam, when you were responding to that question about, what would push people over the fence, you kind of contrasted Disney with some other cruise line. Do you all have any plans or aspirations to try another cruise line?
Yeah, so actually, in a few weeks, Brian and Nathan are headed on Royal Caribbean on a short 3-night cruise out of Port Canaveral, and they're going to be going to Coco Key. I'm going to say I don't care that our CCL pronounces it Coco K. It's Coco Key. So they're going to have a perfect day at Coco Key. And they'll be reporting back. I am not going on that cruise. I'm letting this be a boys' trip. But yeah, that's going to be, I think, their first experience on Royal. I'm definitely open to traveling on other cruise lines, but I will say I'm more curious about Virgin Voyages than I am about most of the family focused cruise lines. I think that checking out an adults only cruise line that seems to be really doing some really interesting things in the adult only space is something I'm more interested in.
I literally just booked my first Virgin Voyages cruise. It's also my first transatlantic. So that's but getting back to getting back to this trip. What ship, Brian?
Yeah, so we're on the Independence of the Seas, so not one of the newest ships, but not, the oldest either. And, I'm already comparing, contrasting the experiences in my mind leading up to the cruise, because they do things very differently in the lead up process than Disney does. And excited to try it, though. Very excited to try it. I personally would also love to try a sailing on Celebrity and some of their newer Apex class ships. I'd love to get on one of the Royal really large ships, the Oasis class ships, just to see what that experience is like. And of course, I think at some point, Sam and I are going to have to hit up a couple of the cruise lines that come out of Seattle, because we've yet to sail out of our home port. We have plans to do an Alaska sailing on Disney, but Disney ports out of Vancouver. And so would love to be able to have the experience of just driving down to the port on the morning of with a cup of coffee in my hand and boarding a ship. But to do that, we'd have to sail, I think, on Royal or Norwegian or Princess. So I'm sure that we have some other sailings and other cruise lines in our future. Right now, we are sticking our allegiance with Disney because we're trying to get to their new Pearl Castaway Club status. So we need 25 cruises to hit that status, which is their new top tier status. And at this point, we thought we'd hit it next year, but at this point, we've booked enough cruises that we'll probably hit it this year. So.
Yeah, we're also looking forward to going to Disney's newest private island. So in addition to Castaway Key, they will have Lighthouse Point, which is on the island of Eleuthera, and that's going to be ships are going to be starting to sail there in June of next year, so June 2024. So we're going to be on not the first or second sailing, but one of the early sailings that goes to Lighthouse Point. So that's it's hard for us to veer from Disney when Disney's offering some new and unique experiences within just that line.
Mm-hmm. Well, a couple of things. I just interviewed for a couple of weeks from now, podcast, the godmother of Independence of the Seas.
Oh, cool!
Wow.
Yep. So you'll see her plaque on the ship, and I think you'll love Independence of the Seas. I haven't been on it, but I know a whole lot about it because, first of all, I wrote about the godmother in the first book, The Joy of Cruising, but I had booked Independence of the Seas with my grandkids, and it was one of those casualties of the cruising shutdown. So it never happened, but I know a whole lot about it because I research things to death when I'm going to book it, and I'm going to make a prediction. I got a feeling that Nathan is just going to love Perfect Day. I say it the wrong way. Perfect Day at Coco Cay. And Ryan's going to come back and say, Sam, we got to do this again. So I got a feeling you're going to be taking a couple of Royal Caribbean cruises, but we'll see. What projects are you working on for DCL Duo right now?
Our biggest project in the hopper right now is we are doing our inaugural podcast cruise next year, and so that has caused a lot of anxiety in our household as to whether we're going to have enough people sailing with us out in the community to really make that viable. But we're giving it a go. We've got a lot of interest and got a block of rooms booked, and I think a little over half of them are taken, and so we're pretty excited to give that a try and sail with listeners. The biggest beneficial side effect of our podcast is this community that we've built, and it is difficult for us now to be on a Disney ship without some family reaching out saying that they listen to the podcast, and we end up eating dinner with them, meeting them, those sorts of things. It's been fabulous for us. And we've made a lot of friends in the community, sail with a lot of friends now in the community. And so it's fun to do that. And we're looking forward to sort of trying to bring all of our listeners together on one ship, headed to Lighthouse Point next June on the Magic out of Fort Lauderdale for our inaugural podcast cruise. So I think that's the biggest thing we got going on.
Mm-hmm. I wish you the best with that. I'm a member of the DCL Duo Facebook group, and I saw that you're doing that, and kind of I consider you guys my podcaster mentors, and I hope that I'm in a position to do a group cruise maybe a few years from now. So I sure hope that I wish you all the best with that.
Thank you.
Well, if you do it, Paul, we will probably sign up.
Yeah,
because we'd love to sail with you one day. So yeah,
absolutely.
So how do we follow DCL Duo on social media and the web?
I like to say now, because I used to list it all out, I like to say now the best way to find us and connect with us is at our website, DCLduo.com. It's got all of our social media links there. We actually recently started a Substack newsletter that we kind of, anything that we think that's really important for our community to know, we've been pushing out through a newsletter, so you can get it right in your inbox and you can sign up for that on our website. But we're on all the things. We're on Twitter. As Paul mentioned, we have a Facebook group, a Facebook page. We're on Instagram. We're a little bit on TikTok. We're trying to make that work, but it may be beyond our generation at some level, but we're trying. And so yeah, that website, DCLduo.com, is the place where you can go to just find all the ways to connect with us in the show.
Yeah, but the best way to sort of join in on the cruise discussion is in our Facebook group, our Facebook community. It's a really nice group. It's a very positive and friendly group where people are asking questions as first timers or very experienced cruisers are asking about, very specific itineraries that they're interested in. It's a really great community. That's probably the place where we interact with listeners the most, outside of obviously having guests on our show. We're pretty active on Instagram, I would say, as well. But Instagram, it's more obviously us posting when we're out on trips or posting about particular topics, that sort of a thing. So yeah, listen to us on all of the major podcast providers. So that's where you'll, if you want to hear our show and hear, from all of the guests that we have, including Paul, who's been on, I think 3 times now. We've got, 300 shows, plus in our catalog at this point, but most people listen to us on Apple Podcasts, but we're on Stitcher and Google and all the other podcast platforms.
We're also on YouTube. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/DCL Duo. So we're out there on YouTube. We don't do a ton in video, but Paul, to your earlier question about major projects, like that is a major focus of mine for the next year, is trying to figure out how we can kind of increase our footprint in the video space too. So,
So let's talk about the future. What do you have booked besides the Independence of the Seas?
Too many.
How much time do you have? You
got another hour?
Yeah. So we are booked on. So step back here. Our next cruise, Nathan and I are doing Royal in May on Independence of the Seas, and then we've got. In July, we will be back on the Wish. We have some friends getting married at Disney World, and they are.
It's actually August.
Oh, August. Okay, fair enough. We leave in July, but yes, in August we'll be back on the Wish for back-to-back 3-4 night sailing with some friends who are getting married at Disney World. In September, we're flying out to Miami. We're going to do our first cruise on the Magic, since she will have been refitted. And so some new spaces and experiences on board we're hoping to see. So we're doing a little 3-night cruise. I can't remember if that one's going out of Miami or Fort Lauderdale, but one of those two ports.
It's Miami. Yeah,
Miami.
it's Miami.
Yeah, Disney's winding down its commitment in Miami and moving everything over to Fort Lauderdale. So we'll get to experience the Miami sail away, and then forevermore it will be out of Fort Lauderdale. We actually just booked a 3-night cruise in October on the Wish with a family we enjoy sailing with. And so we'll be out there to experience Halloween on the high seas with Disney Cruise Line on the Disney Wish. And then in November, we've got a 7-night cruise aboard the Disney Magic out of San Diego. We love sailing at Thanksgiving time. So we'll be doing a lengthier cruise down the Mexican Riviera with Disney Cruise Line. In December, we're doing our first Adventures by Disney trip. We're doing a river cruise on AMA Waterways from Munich to Budapest. It's a Christmas markets river cruise. And then we've got some things booked out even into next year, the most exciting of which is our 3-night podcasting cruise that will go to Lighthouse Point. And we're fingers crossed. We're recording this the day before Disney's phone lines will open for Disney Vacation Club members to book a special sailing to Lighthouse Point. And we're hoping to book that one and couple it up with our podcast cruise. So a lot of sailing ahead, a lot of planned sailing, a lot of sailings. I would say they're in the hopper or of interest to us. But yeah, we love being out there on the ocean. So we will fly far and wide to do it.
Is that your first river cruise, the Disney Markets cruise?
Yes. Our first experience with Adventures by Disney and our first river cruise.
And it's been delayed. We've delayed it twice. So this was supposed to happen 2 years ago, and then we delayed it by 1 year, and then we delayed it by a second year. So it's finally going to happen.
Well, river cruise is on my bucket list. I am very, very close to booking one for August of 24. My wife doesn't know it yet, but she'll know it when this podcast comes out.
Fantastic. I love it.
But yeah, I'll be looking forward to your trip reports on the AMA Waterways cruise. What's on your bucket list?
I have 2 cruises at the top of my bucket list, one of which will absolutely have to wait into retirement. But the 2 at the top of my bucket list are an Iceland cruise, a cruise that goes to Iceland. Disney has had some really interesting itineraries headed that direction, and I've heard such fabulous things about Iceland, and we so enjoyed our experience in Norway that I'd really love to do that trip. And then the other one is I'd love to do some type of world cruise, whether that is a full-on world cruise or some of these other cruise experiences I've been seeing. I think somebody announced today, was it Holland America, or yesterday, I guess it was Holland America, said they were doing a pole-to-pole cruise that would stop at like 68 destinations. I want to do one of those longer sailings to hit some of the places in the world I just haven't been yet, and get a taste for them. So, but that is definitely one that will have to wait until retirement.
Yeah. And I would say mine are a little bit different. Not that I don't want to do the ones that Brian wants to do, but I of course want to do Alaska, and I know we will do that, but it's still something that we've pushed out by a couple of years. We're kind of waiting until Nathan's just a little bit older, because a lot of the excursions have age limits. And for Disney in particular, a lot of it's 12 and up. So we're thinking we're going to wait to do Alaska until he is 12. So that's a few years away. So that's one, but I really want to do a transatlantic or trans-Pacific, frankly. I just want all those days at sea. I love days at sea. So those are on the list, but we've had an opportunity to talk to a couple of people who've done the Galapagos. So this is like expedition, small ship cruising, not large ship cruising. And it just sounds incredible. The wildlife, the scenery. I can't wait to do that. Again, that might be much further off in our cruising life. It might be when Nathan's an adult. It might be after retirement. I'm not sure. But those are definitely on my bucket list.
Antarctica too, from an expedition cruising standpoint. I'd love to go see Antarctica. So yeah.
Well, before I let you go, a couple of fun or light cruise questions, and then perhaps an oddball question that doesn't really have anything to do with cruising. So the first, this is for me to get some ideas. What's your favorite cruise drink and cruise dish or cruise food?
Oh yeah. Okay. I've got. I'll give you my drink first. my favorite drink, this is an alcoholic drink. It's on Disney Cruise Line. It's called the Banana Caribe. And basically it is a pina colada. If a pina colada and a banana had a baby, that's what this drink would be. So it's a pina colada with banana in it. It's delicious. It's a rum drink, of course. Yeah, I love it. And it's a blended drink. Of course, it's it's delicious.
A frozen drink.
Yeah, a frozen drink. Food. Well, I'll let Brian jump in with his favorite cruise drink, and then we can answer food.
Oh, I'm going to do both. So my favorite cruise drink is the smoked old fashioned that you can get in Hook's Barbary on board the Disney Wish. This was like a new thing they did. They separated out pieces of the spa into smaller venues. And so they opened a, very wood paneled kind of barber shop on board for men's treatments. And at night, it's kind of a speakeasy bar. And they have a bartender there making fabulous old fashions and then smoking them on board. He's the only crew member on board who's allowed to have a lighter, so he can do this process. So it's really fabulous. One of my favorite drinks by far. Favorite food, I would have to say it is the barbecue that's available on the Disney Wish's pool deck. This was a new thing they introduced with the Disney Wish, was a really upgraded experience for the pool food. And the barbecue spot is one of the fan favorites right now. And so it's definitely top of my list.
Yeah. Okay. So food, this is hard for me. I'm going to give you two because I can't narrow it down to one. And Brian always laughs at me because I never follow the rules of questions. But on all of the Disney ships, there is a restaurant called Palo, which is an Italian themed adults only restaurant. And they have at their brunch this amazing chicken parmesan. It's just, I love chicken parmesan. I'm originally from New York, just like you, Paul. And I just can't, I can't say no to a good chicken parm. And it comes on a bed of risotto and it's just fantastic. But the other item I have to mention, and maybe this gets an honorable mention, but it is, there is an Oreo cheesecake that they have on Disney Cruise Line only on embarkation day lunch. They don't have it like on the dessert menu for dinner or on any other day. And it is just such a good, I love plain cheesecake normally, but this Oreo cheesecake is so delicious. I just can't even describe how good it is. Maybe it's better because it's on a ship though. I don't know.
Next fun cruise question. What's your most memorable or most outlandish or even most embarrassing cruise or port experience?
Do you want me to start first, Brian? Since mine's not as happy, Brian, I'll give you a happy one. I'm going to give you kind of a bummer one, but I got COVID on the Disney Wonder spring break of 2022. And I got quarantined on the ship on our last day of cruising. Because I had tested positive. And so I was sent down to deck 2. I was escorted by, men in Tyvek suits. And when I was leaving the ship the next morning, because it was disembarkation, there were men in like crazy Tyvek suits. And one of them had like this sprayer thing, which I can only imagine was spraying disinfectant, but it was like behind me. And I felt like I was, the alien or the monster in Monsters Inc. who gets the kid's sock on his back. And then it goes 2319. And then you get these men in Tyvek suits, like spraying stuff all over the person as if they need to kill it with disinfectant. But it's just, it was this really surreal experience being quarantined on the cruise ship in general. And I was quite sick, to be perfectly honest. So that part was not fun or funny, but the moment of getting escorted down to like a lower deck gangway, I did not go out where all the regular passengers went out. With these men in Tyvek suits and this disinfectant spray was kind of comical, to be perfectly honest. I'll never forget it.
I'd say that's pretty memorable.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'll say my most memorable experience, and the thing that really just landed the Disney cruising obsession for me, we did a Star Wars day at sea sailing on the Disney Fantasy in probably, I don't know if it was 2018 or 2019, but it was our son's, I think, first full cruising, like 7-night cruising experience on Disney Cruise Line. We had taken him on a small test cruise just to see how he'd do when he was younger. But anyway, as a part of the Star Wars Day at Sea Sailing, they had these special character meetups that you had to get tickets for. And the tickets were free, just they were a way to control the crowds. But one of the meetups was with Chewbacca. And so we showed up and we were at the rear of the line because we had come late. And so we had a lot of time standing in line, sort of staring at Chewbacca. And at one point, as we're getting closer, our son stopped and said, "Mommy, Daddy, Chewbacca is real." And I was like, I looked at him, he's like, his eyes are blinking and there's no one that tall. And he walked up thinking Wookiees are real. I'm meeting one. And he just got this. We have this picture. I can't find it, but I swear we have this picture where Chewbacca is hugging him and you can barely see him because he's covered by Wookiee. And so that experience just stands out in my mind, as does we immediately left there to go to meet C-3PO and R2-D2. And since this isn't the normal Disney cruising audience, I'll just say, if you don't want your kids to have the magic spoiled, just, fast forward 30 seconds here. But they have someone standing in the restaurant kind of out of the way controlling R2-D2. Well, our son didn't pick up on that. They're kind of have their hands in a bag and it just looks like they're leaning up against a wall. But he walks up and he goes, "There's no way these droids aren't real. No one's that small to fit in that costume." And so he firmly believed for a while that these things were real. And to have that level of magic happen, that your kids think this isn't just someone in a suit, it's a real thing happening on board, like that is 100% the story I would tell people as to why we sailed Disney Cruise Line. Like, that is the level of magic, entertainment, and experience they are giving. Our son thought these things.
That's a wonderful story.
Yeah. And he knew about Mickey and Minnie because he knew that, we had just seen Mickey and Minnie at the parks and there was no way for them to be in two places at the same time. So that's, he knew the character thing generally, which I as Brian said, I won't spoil now, but he understood, and still he to this day does understand what's really going on with the characters, though.
The oddball question. You have a large following, and let me say welcome to the DCL Duo fans who are listening. Share one thing that my listeners and your fans don't know about Sam and Brian.
This is a hard one because we're pretty open about ourselves. I'm going to give just a strange one, which is I hate onions. I do not like onions in anything, on anything, touching my food, anything. I love like stir fry, but I will literally sit there and pick out the onions one by one. And it's raw onions, cooked onions. It doesn't matter. The only way onions are okay in my food is if they're like in like a tomato sauce where they're so small, I can't really distinguish them from the other food. So yeah, that's the only one I can really think. I used to be a really, really picky eater, which people probably wouldn't know that from our show, because we talk about going to Enchante and Remy and Palo, which are the adult only restaurants. Palo, you don't need to be super adventurous to go to, but Remy and Enchante, you do. I mean, I eat escargot on the cruise, so people would probably think I'm not a picky eater. I used to be a really, really picky eater to the point that I drove my parents crazy. So maybe that's a different good one.
So you won't be naming French onion soup as your favorite cruise dish.
No, and the funny part is I like the broth, but I'll eat like a little bit of the broth and then I have to stop because I can't eat the actual onions. I like the cheese on the top. I don't mind the broth, but the actual onions cannot touch. So I never order French onion soup anywhere. Brian actually loves French onion soup. So
just order French onion soup and tell them hold the onions.
Hold the onions, exactly. Hold the onions, the bread, the cheese.
When I first met Sam and we went out to dinner for our first date, like I asked if we should order like a glass or a bottle of red wine, and she just looked at me and said, I don't like red wine.
Yeah, that's true.
And that was the state. And I looked at her and I said, like all red wine? Like, well, I had some Merlots in Virginia that weren't good, so I'm just not a red wine fan. And I was like, oh my Lord, like we need to expand your horizons.
To be fair, I love red wine now, but not Merlot.
Yes.
It's not. I still don't really drink Merlot, but I do love red wine.
Yes. Yes.
But Brian,
Yes.
what's something about you that people don't know?
Yeah, I normally the go-to for me is how introverted I am, but now that's out there in Paul's book, and I think we've talked about it on our show. So I'm going to share. I am big into puzzles, and not like jigsaw puzzles. I love doing crossword puzzles and word puzzles, and these very strange puzzles that are niche to the technology community, because I work for big tech. I'm not a engineer, I'm a lawyer, but I got introduced to these puzzles that really you're handed a piece of paper that has information on it but no instructions, and you have to both define or divine the instructions and then solve the puzzle. And so I am big into that. You can find me sitting on the cruise, usually with a binder full of puzzles, working puzzles by the pool. So that's kind of the fact that people may not know about me.
Yeah.
Finally, we're going to put you to work. Please announce this week's winner of a copy of The Joy of Cruising or Cruising Interrupted.
Yeah, I'll do this. I love announcing a winner. This week, Jamie Margolis Ross, you are a big winner. Congratulations.
Great. Jamie is a member of the Joy of Cruising podcast group on Facebook, so I will reach out to her after this episode.
Awesome.
Sam
Congrats,
and Brian,
Jamie.
Congrats. It is so good to get to chat with you again. Thank you for coming on the Joy of Cruising podcast. I know that you'll be back on in the not too distant future. I want to hear what Brian thought about the Royal Caribbean and Perfect Day at, okay, I'll say it, Coco Key.
Yes, I won.
But
no, thank you so much for having us, Paul. This has been fantastic. We love, of course, visiting with you. We consider you our friend. We don't consider us to be your mentor. If anything, you are our mentor. You inspire us with your books, and now with your podcast as well. But we so appreciate you. You've been such a great enthusiast of our show. And we love telling people about your books because they're just awesome.
Well, thank you. Thank you. All the best to DCL Duo. And as they say, I'll see you on the ocean.
Joy of Cruising and Cruising Interrupted can be ordered at the link on the joyofcruisingpodcast.com, each for $16.99 plus shipping. Order the soon-to-be-released The Joy of Cruising Again, also at thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com for $18.99. For each of the 3 books, use the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast and get $4 off. Again, the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast. Enter to win a copy of The Joy of Cruising or Cruising Interrupted while supplies last at thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com by joining the Joy of Cruising Podcast Facebook group or both to increase your chance to win. A winner will be announced on each show. Please leave us a review and tell a friend about us. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed the brief escape to the ocean. See you next week. Exciting news, passionate cruisers. The Joy of Cruising Again book was just released. Order the ebook at your favorite online retailer. The paperback can be ordered by copying the web address listed at the podcast website, www.thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com. Don't forget to use the coupon code Joy of Cruising Podcast to get $4 off. We think you'll enjoy the new book as much as Paul enjoyed writing it, and we would love to hear your comments at the Joy of Cruising Again Facebook page or at the Joy of Cruising Instagram page. Thank you.